as Sam has mentioned, the work that we conducted in Tunisia under the conservation agriculture and livestock and crop livestock systems, and which a project which is in phase 2 and that is funded by IFAD. So the project team consists of many people from different organizations, a PhD student, research assistant, very strong ICARDA person in the field, a person working on machinery, and connecting us to the implementers, such as the radio program. I'm going to be presenting some of the digital extension interventions that we had to do due to COVID-19. Some leaders in the project, as well as the forage officials and Tunisian Agriculture Research Institute officials, researchers, or implementers. So we are not starting from scratch. This is phase 2, and we really wanted to understand the gendered impacts that have happened in phase 1. We collected sex disaggregated data in 4 regions on the impact of conservation agriculture that was implemented in phase 1, as well as the needs that men and women wanted from both crops and livestock, for both crops and livestock. So we worked in 4 regions in northern Tunisia. The topography is different. So Saliana is quite mountainous and difficult to operate with machinery, as well as the other regions, but to a less extent. And soil erosion is a big problem there. We also took an intersectional approach to gender. By that, we wanted to hear from in separate focus groups from middle class men and women, as well as low income men and women. So to operationalize this definition of middle class and low income, we interviewed key informants in the 4 regions. And we found that livestock, I'm not going to present all the definitions of low and middle class. I just picked 2 regions. But we found that there are large variations in landholding size between the regions. So you see here, it's less than 20 hectares in Beja, but it's less than 5 hectares for low income in Kif. But consistently, more or less, the number of livestock was the same. So it's less than 5 cows and 30 sheep for low income, that's the threshold, and less than 5 cows and 20 to 50 sheep in Kif. So we found similar, but very large, similar meanings, similar livestock holding for low and middle income, but very large variations for land size. So in order to identify who is low income and who is middle income, we had to do this exercise, after which we selected respondents for the focus groups. So great. So in summary, the positive impacts of conservation agriculture, we asked them about the positive and the negative impacts, is that it increased the number of newborns and it provided better quality of fodder. And the conservation agriculture, which was implemented, was related to crop rotation with the introduction of fodder crops. So that's why there was an increase in newborns and fodder access. And this was only reported by men. Availability of fodder for better income, this was reported by both men and women in the 4 regions. And only women have mentioned that growing legumes provided more fodder and fertilized the land. But it's kind of similar to what men says here. So it's not that different from men. And also only men mentioned that because there is no tillage, this has reduced the need to hire labor and also the work related to tillage. However, there were some negative impacts. So only women mentioned that now they had to graze further away. And both men and women mentioned that because of this permanent cover, the need for permanent cover, this has prevented grazing, which made it difficult to feed their cattle. And also they had to purchase the feed. So this has increased their spending on fodder. So we see quite contradictory findings. Here people said that it led to more available fodder, but here to less available fodder. And also the negative impact, which was only mentioned by men, was related to the large size of the direct seeder, and especially in areas where the land is quite small, and also its limited availability. Yeah, just making sure. Yeah, so the recommendations related to conservation agriculture, these are focus groups that were conducted in the beginning of phase 2 of the project, were related to purchasing more livestock, supporting free fodder, training sessions, accessing grants and loans. And the red points are the ones that were mentioned by women and not by men, and vice versa. Supporting the marketing, women lacked ability to market, integrate fodder into the crop system, and also mechanized seeder, because the terrain is very difficult. So it's difficult for machines to access these lands. Here I will not repeat what women said, because it's the same for men, but they have mentioned also support for herbicides, financial support to purchase herbicides for weeding, and also the need to adopt crop rotation, how to do that in order to eliminate disease and enrich the soil. So with regards to livestock, women recommended more access to forage crops and fodder, seed supply, so that they could plant it. Also the breeding projects, particularly related to cattle. Also supporting farmers in poultry and rabbit farming. They had a labor shortage problem. This relates, of course, to women's double or triple day issue that they face globally. Training farmers on animal health and feed. This falls into women's role. They are more involved than men in these tasks. Improving access to water. This is a very dry area, so they have issues with accessing water. In some areas, they have to drive, buy water, and then so that they are able to access it. Again, the issue of marketing of livestock products and also livestock animals came again here. And this could also be because of the lockdowns. The markets were closed during lockdown. Actually, yeah, so this could be related to that as well. Supporting farmers by accessing finance and credit. Again, this came again. Creation of center for education for livestock. So I won't repeat it for men, but what was different here is that men asked that the extension system works directly with farmers or through the cooperatives in order to ensure the sustainability of the project, so that they internalize the knowledge and access the machines, so that they take control over the sustainability of the project. So based on these findings and based on what we know about the region in the Middle East and gender issues in the Middle East, we designed an approach for gender integration, which was not present in phase 1. Maybe not as present in phase 1. So what we did, because of the head of the household is going to provide information to the other members in the household, which a lot of literature has criticized as being not true. And also we wanted to improve women's ability to make decisions with regards to agriculture production. So with more knowledge, you can make better decisions. And also because the roles might be different. So you can, if you train one person, it doesn't mean that you also need to train the other person because they are also doing different roles. So you need to train based on their roles. So what we did is we, like I said before, we listened to the women and the men, and we integrated what are their needs for information in the project. So animal health, feeding, as well as working in a group. They mentioned cooperatives like the Milk Collective. So we worked with women in groups as well as individuals. So we also worked on strengthening women's leadership in these communities through supporting associations, women associations, by giving them the machines, by giving them the information, and also by giving them phones, because we had trouble accessing them when we called the association. Sometimes it's empty and nobody responds, so we had difficulty accessing them to invite them to trainings. So we gave them phones. Also involving women in existing groups that were targeted. So we worked with both women exclusive groups and gender mixed groups to target them with the technologies, with the knowledge. And I hope here you can see some of the photos whereby women were targeted. As well as, I think this is very important, women farmers were hosting CLCA trials. So these are women that are role models in the community, women who can transgress gender norms, have better mobility. So we hosted some of these technologies, some of these trials on their fields. And that's important because this way other women can learn. Because in the Tunisian culture, it's quite gender segregated. More so in Algeria than in Tunisia, but it's also gender segregated. Algeria is another country where we also worked. And the third way is we really wanted to reduce the, like I said before, the double day, the triple day that women have to do worldwide. We did that by introduction of small-scale machines, which could reduce their work burden. So this one is the feed grinder. So where you could put leftovers, tomato, cactus, different crops, dates, hay, and then it produces the feed. And that was important because, especially for the young livestock, because this way they don't break their teeth, and the selling price is better. And also the animal health is better when they have such refined feed. And also the handheld seeder was a big success. Oh, sorry. The handheld seeder was a big success. They were able to let go of having to depend on hired male labor, because seed spreading was often done by men through the machine. But with a handheld seeder, it was they felt that it saves up hired labor as well. It gives them more independence to plant on time, and also reduce the time it needs for the land to be planted, because the seeds are spread evenly, and they said it's very easy to use. And they've also used it to feed chicken, so it had multiple uses. And they also mentioned that it reduces the amount of time needed to do these tasks. As well as the seed cleaner also was a big success, because they said they would spend 3 days doing the seed cleaning, but through the seed cleaner, they were able to save up time. Usually cleaning the seeds is a woman task. And this machine was given to a cooperative, which made it accessible to other people in the community. So these cooperatives were important for both cooperative members and non-members. So the COVID pandemic hit, as we all know, as we all know in the project. People in the project can definitely remember how COVID disrupted our activities. There were lockdowns and they were recurring, and the movement between different cities became more difficult. So what we did is we decided to go digital for extension, and we designed different interventions. So we took a blended approach whereby we used the radio as well as the SMS. We really wanted to do a voice-based extension, but this was not available in Tunisia. And we could only find one company in Egypt that can operate, but it was expensive beyond the budget of the project. And there were also some fundraising efforts through accessing, for example, the COVID fund from policies, institutions, and markets. So what we did, we had experience from a prior project called Mind the Gap. And based on that project, we learned that in these digital this SMS information sharing, there were two problems. The first one is that they were starting with Dear Brother Farmer. And the second problem is that the language that was used was very formal. And when we evaluated the intervention, many of the farmers mentioned that the message was difficult to understand. So we did two things. We removed Dear Brother Farmer, and we also simplified the language that was used as much as possible close to the spoken language. And also we used sharing prompts in order to facilitate women's access to digital extension. Because in a project conducted in the same areas, we found that half of the women that were surveyed in a random survey had access to a phone, as opposed to men. 92% of these men had access to a phone. So we really wanted these sharing prompts we really wanted to use these sharing prompts in order to facilitate women's access to information. So the language was designed with Tunisian scientists, particularly the feed and forage scientist. She proposed to use the following sentence: a basket is carried by two. Share the SMS information with your spouse so the benefits accrue for two. Of course, this was in Arabic, but it also rhymes in English. And then based on the survey, we worked with a survey with 40 farmers. We identify topics of interest to both farmers as well as topics which are under the mandate of this project. This is just to show you the problem that we had with illiteracy. So that's why we used the blended approach, also using the radio, which was through the Ministry of Agriculture. Radio spot is called Mawasim, which means seasons. You see here that 34% of our beneficiaries, women beneficiaries, were illiterate, as opposed to 9% for men. So we, as I said before, we also wanted to make sure that our extension is digital responsive, is gender responsive. Yes, I hope I didn't, yeah. So we had 4 categories of beneficiaries: men not prompted to share, which is the business quo, and the status quo, and then men prompted to share with their spouses, and then women prompted to share with other household members or their spouses, but some of these women were heads of households. So that's why we said other members, other household members. And then category 4, we send the message to both the husband and wife, and we also distributed phones to 150 women. So some of these women and then we surveyed randomly. We picked 40 from each category. I mean, of course, here we picked 80 because there was both. This category, the number was double, was husbands and wives. And in total, we aimed to send the messages to 750 farmers, but we were short by 100 something, but we had to start, and we delivered the messaging to 624 farmers, and we evaluated the usefulness, the adoption, among other things, and I will talk about that, with 242 farmers, 121 men, and 121 women. So what the topics that we chose were related to organizations, and this was important for us because through organizations we felt that ability to access a machine becomes much better. There's coherence in the group. I mean, of course, there's also problems. But we thought that organizations would also help us in scaling our technologies, which was a big focus of this project. So we wanted farmers to learn more about organizations, and so we had different topics about that. Animal health, because women requested to know, and mostly women requested to know about animal health and animal feeding, and conservation agriculture, because farmers, both men and women, said they want to learn more about conservation agriculture. So there was a calendar for sending these SMS as well as the radio programs. So we were inviting the farmer to listen to the radio the night before or the evening before the radio spot was being aired. And the radio spots were the same content as the SMS messages, but they were oral and they were recorded in spoken language. And we also featured women experts so that the farmer or the woman farmer can also connect with this idea that a woman can also be an expert. We sent sharing prompts to half of the participants in order to see the effectiveness of these sharing prompts. So first of all, we evaluated what were the benefits of owning a phone. And I think this is important because in the region, phone ownership is not issue of physical barrier. It's not just that, women don't own a phone because physically they can't own it because they don't have money or but it's an issue also of gender norms. Women don't have a phone. It was reported that because married women or young women, this will not be appropriate for them to own a phone so that they don't engage with any suspicious behavior. So I think that we need to also look at changes in gender norms with regards to phone ownership in the future. And we will talk about that in a bit. So we interviewed 40 women who have received the phone through the project out of 150. And we also, every 6 months, Ziad, who is the field person, knowledge manager in Tunisia, he also made sure that women's phones stay active. So every 6 months, we actually gave them cards so that their phone lines stay active. And what was reported mostly is that women benefited through learning about extension. So the most prominent benefits that women have reported was that they were able to receive agricultural extension. So many of these women have not received agricultural extension before. This was their first time, but also some others have already received information, especially those that belong to cooperatives. And also they were able to communicate with service providers like the veterinarian even healthcare. They were able to call their doctors. And this also happened during the lockdown. So as they lived in rural areas and they were isolated, they were able to connect with the services that might have not been, they might not have been able to do that had it not been for the phone. So also there were many of them have reported using the phone for personal reasons because it was locked down. It was very important for them to stay in touch with their family and relatives. Also, they ordered feeds. Like I said, they also contacted drivers from the milk complex to sell their milk. Also contacted workers to hire workers, or also contacted the cooperative and livestock breeding office. So that was on the importance of the phone. And very few women said that the phone was not useful. I think it was just one woman who said it was not useful. So here I want to present about what was learned and what was learned useful. So we found that there were gender differences in what was learned in the organizations, conservation agriculture, animal and feed, and also moralizing, because women are more involved in taking care of animals and in feeding animals. We also found that women generally were more likely to find the information on all the topics useful than men, which demonstrates their eagerness to learn, and perhaps also highlights that the gap, they have not been receiving information and now they received it, so they find it useful. We also found that education was a very important determinant to learning about, in general, learning about all topics, but particularly about knowledge-intensive topics like professional organizations and conservation agriculture. So men, mostly men, who, because the women were not as educated as men, who were more educated were more likely to benefit from these topics, knowledge-intensive topics. We also found that when the information is shared, the SMS and the sharing the SMS, when it was shared with both the husband and the wife, it was more likely that there's learning and finding useful these knowledge-intensive topics. And also, I will show you later, there was more adoption when both the husband and wife were targeted. We also found that when there was sharing prompts, in the cases where men and women were asked to share, that we found that it was also more likely for them to learn and find the information useful. I couldn't present all the tables, but I have shared the paper in the last slide. You can look at it for more details. So with regards to adoption and the effectiveness of the sharing prompts. In the men-only group, we found 44% of them have adopted new practices, and I will talk about what they have adopted in a second. Men asked to share, we also found similar rates of adoption. However, we found an increase, 10% increase, which was significant, in sharing information when they were prompted to share with their spouses. The same for women who were prompted to share. We found also a 9% increase in sharing information. And also we found higher adoption rates for women for new practices. This again might reflect a woman's eagerness to adopt, to learn, as there's a big gender gap in women's ability to access this information and technologies. and practices. We found that also here we found that the adoption rate of new practices was higher when both husbands and wives were targeted, and it was higher for wives than it was for husbands. Just like here, it was higher for women than it was for men. And also we found that the average number of practices adopted was the highest when the husband and wives were both sent the information. And also it was higher when there were prompts to share. So here, actually women were more likely to also adopt. Yeah, so they were more likely to share and more likely to adopt new practices. But the highest adoption was when both husbands and wives were sent the information. So the adoption was related to livestock feeding, and this was both by men and women. Mixing feeds and making sure that what feed to mix, what components of feed to mix, and also the accuracy using the scale for this mix. And also practices related to grazing were only reported by women. So maybe because men already knew that. Issues around timing for grazing, as well as feeding green straw, was also reported as practices adopted by women. With regards to animal health, it was more women than men that reported this, as I said before, but this was related to livestock vaccination, monitoring of health, and giving the right medication. And the practice of cultivating fodder crops, like fertilizing at the right time, using pesticide, using herbicide. Okay, so what are the recommendations of our study, and what are the future research that stem out of this work? Is that we recommend strengthening women's access for phone. As I said before, we had a hard time reaching women because we didn't know how to reach them. But when we had the phone, especially when we had groups, if you reach one woman, you can reach more, the rest of the group, as well as targeting information to both husbands and wives. And because of the high illiteracy, also using visual and audio approaches, as well as using sharing prompts, because we cannot expect to give phones to all the women. Maybe it will take a long time to reach that, as well as providing more rigorous extension for knowledge-intensive topics like conservation agricultures and rural collectives. We also found that 61% of women who participated in the who were beneficiaries of the digital extension, they reported improved confidence in agricultural decision-making. And we think that's very important. We have also seen that there could be a change in gender norms, and this requires more studies to see what norms have changed, like norms around mobility, around phone ownership, income generation, what can be learned in terms of how we can change harmful gender norms, and also how do we measure this change in norms. And just for those of you who are curious about norms and don't know much, so we are talking about norms because these are structural barriers. These are the hidden but underlying barriers for women's ability to benefit equitably from project interventions, such as those related to mobility or to owning a phone, or to being a leader in a rural collective, or to being a farmer more generally. And I think this is important because the region is experiencing a feminization of agriculture, and women are becoming more and more involved in farming. And this is because men are taking on non-agricultural jobs or out migrating and so on. And we also want to highlight the importance of introducing interventions in tandem for addressing both women's practical and strategic needs. In our work, you know, there's always this dilemma: do we put our strength in addressing the urgent needs, or do we also look at the work on the underlying barriers, such as like I said, mobility, and whether or not it's acceptable for a woman to own a phone. But what we found is that those two are not mutually exclusive. So for example, the role models that were that were hosting the conservation agriculture trials, without these role models, we would not have been perhaps able to reach other women in the community. So these approaches are not mutually exclusive. And also, it's important to do both because of women's work burden. So if we are going to give women more responsibilities, such as leadership and income generation, additional responsibilities, we also need to make sure that this is not going to be overwhelming for them, and work as well on this reduction in workload barriers through, for example, the different small-scale machines that I talked about. And for more practical implications, it could be worrisome that the machines are going to break down, and how are they going to be replaced, or how are they going to be fixed is an issue. And like I said before, we sustained these phones through the purchase of every 6 months, the purchase of a phone card. But then when we leave, is that going to be sustained? And at some point we need to leave. So how to make sure that this is going to be sustained in really the long term is the question. And finally, if you are curious, so we have produced some reports with regards to the evaluation of conservation agriculture by gender and class in the first phase, as well as the design of the activities in English and French. And then we have a published paper on digital extension, gender responsive digital extension during the COVID pandemic, based on this project. And also we have 2 policy briefs in Arabic and French, in Arabic and English. And also we have a blog on how, on the seed spreaders and the opinions of women with regards to the time saving and yield increases impact. So with here I stop, and back to you, Sam. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dina. That was really a fascinating presentation. It's always great to get that insight which gender studies provide into farmers' lives. So I'm going to we will be sharing the links to all of the materials which you shared. Dina, maybe you could just post them into the chat here. I'm getting a request to post them in the chat, but we will include them on the website. I'm going to take some questions now from the chat, so please feel free to share them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and make them in person. So this first one is from Santiago, who congratulates you on the presentation. And he says that it's commonly known that when agricultural activities intensify and start to get into this more of a market logic, it is often men who take control. For example, when livestock production is intensified and they start to transition from grazing towards fodder production, and then men start investing more time in this process of the production and commercialization, which could even disempower female farmers as agricultural development occurs, actually having the opposite effect to which we want to see. Is this something which you believe to be true? And have you seen it in the context of the CLCA project?
Yeah, thanks, Sam, and thanks, Santiago, for asking this question. Luckily, we did not see that. I don't think there has been a huge commercialization in the CLCA project, from my opinion. But it's definitely a concern we have, and I think it has to do with the engagement. So when we are hiring, we are bringing in a milk collection point. So we make sure that women are also targeted, not only men, from the onset. And maybe putting women extension agents, or I don't know, women officials in these milk collectives, so that this barrier is overcome with regards to the with it being not socially acceptable for men and women to mingle. But in Tunisia, this did not seem to be a big problem, because when they were calling the vet and they were calling the milk collection point through the phones, as they have reported, they were actually calling men. It'll be interesting to see who are these women. Maybe they're older women, or not necessarily the younger women where the gender norms apply more strongly to them. This issue is definitely important, but we did not see it in Tunisia, and there are ways to overcome it. But I can give an example from Egypt, where the cactus was commercialized, and this was not a problem, believe it or not, because the man thought that this is the lazy farmer crop, and they still, even if it was commercialized, they didn't want to plant it. So it's contextual. Yeah, thank you. I hope I answered your question, Santiago.
So one thing I saw at many points in your presentation is you mentioned the importance of a language in which we communicate and do agricultural extension. Could you reflect maybe on what is the importance and the impact of choosing the correct language when communicating to farmers, and what are the challenges of doing so? Is it a low-hanging fruit, or is it actually quite challenging? And do you have any recommendations about how people can integrate that?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sam, for this question. I mean, obviously, language is very important, because if, in this case, as I said, if you are sending text messages with a dear brother farmer, then you are basically excluding women and not validating them as farmers. You are assuming that only men are farmers and they are the ones worthy of receiving the information, which is very untrue, especially with this increased feminization of agriculture in the region. As well as it's not only in the SMS. I think this language issue, I've seen it in brochures, tax brochures. I've seen it in Egypt. I also presented some of the research findings to FAO, and there was a person who was saying that he was writing "Dear Brother Farmer" in, it's Akhil Muzara. It's like, you're talking, because Arabic is it has a sex, and like in the conjugation, I guess, like French. So that the conjugation throughout was assumed to be a man you are talking to. And then the Lebanese team, they wrote back to him and said, please make it gender inclusive. You are only talking to a male farmer. So it's not only in the SMS messages, it's kind of omnipresent. And again, this norms can be, I mean, for me, it's quite obvious, but they can, for others, they can be a bit subtle. So this language issue is one of those sneaky ways where you are excluding women from your extension services. So yeah, it's very important, and it's not only in Tunisia. Thanks for that question.
And so we have a point here from Rolando, who, he raises a point which you also ended on, I think, which is about the sustainability of interventions such as delivering mobile phones to farmers. I also found this very interesting because I think we know from other contexts that the mere act of owning a mobile phone can have a seismic impact on different issues relating to gender. So, in relation to that, do you think this is sustainable? Did you see within the timescale in which you're observing, any issues relating to upkeep of the SIM cards, upkeep of the mobile phone, or any broader impacts of owning mobile phones? Did this change the culture towards women owning mobile phones and maybe managing the resources to do so?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I don't know if Ziad is here. I think he is better placed to take this question. But this is definitely something that we raised up as a concern and limitation to our study, as well as here and in the publication. I did not ask this question, and definitely there needs to be a follow-up on that. But yeah, thank you. I don't think Ziad is here.
I think he is actually. I don't know, Ziad, if you're here, feel free to open your
Oh, he
microphone.
is here. Yes.
Yeah. But maybe he's shy today. Or we can move on. Meanwhile, I'll just read out this comment from Murad, who wants to add the information from Tunisia. Of a number of leading farmers engaging with the project, women hosting trials, women contracting private companies for seed multiplication. I think you mentioned some points of this in your study, but how important is it to include women as leaders in your project interventions?
Yeah, I mean, there is very few women who are leaders, who are comfortable, like I said, in hosting, or who have the capacity to do that, who have these connections and so on. So we worked very hard, especially the people like Hatem and Surur. This is the conservation agriculture focal point in Tunisian Agriculture Research Institute, as well as the feed and forage scientists in the same institution. They really had a big role in recruiting and finding these women. And it's important, like I said, because they are able to spread the information to other women in the community. So you target a few, but you reach, I mean, they're not a few. The number was really growing, but I'm talking generally from the whole population of farmers. The proportion, that's why I said a few of these women who actually manage the land, because often men and women work on the same farm. So usually the woman is the helper, although, she does a lot of the work. So she's also a farmer, not necessarily a helper. But these women who were seen in the community and saw themselves as farmers are not many, but really it took a lot of hard work and multiple visits and keeping an eye and asking to recruit these women in order to host these technologies. So you target the few, but many more benefit.
Thank you. So I think if there are no other questions, we can pass to the interactive component. Murad is just telling me, I'll read it out because he sent it as a direct message. There's a growing number indeed of leading women farmers. The forage, knowledge, and scaling hub is based within a cooperative of 72 women. So it seems like there's some real impacts of the project to document, and we will share your papers when we have the documentation of this event. So in the chat now, just go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to say we have a movie about the impacts, but unfortunately it's not ready for presenting. But we do talk about these forages, the feed and forages interventions with women-based cooperatives.
Thank you. So I've just put a link into the chat. Hopefully you can all access it. This is to the interactive space, the same as last time. I hope we will, in a future exercise, be able to hear from the Latin American example and add those learnings to this interactive exercise. But we wish to document your engagement with this, the learnings which have been presented. So please click on this link, and hopefully I can see you all over there, just in the chat, to record a little bit of your feedback. So I'm just going to go there myself. I'm seeing a few people coming in. Let me know again in the chat if you have any issues with using this platform, and I can help you. So once you,
I mean, I'm sorry, Sam, you are breaking. Is it just me? Oh, Sam, you are breaking. Is it just me who cannot hear you properly?
I
Maybe
don't
we
want
should
to
turn
say
our
that I
cameras
hope
off.
so, but it could be the case. I also find you breaking up a little bit, but it could be my internet. I do see people here, so let me know if you really can't hear me. So
Yeah,
first
maybe you
question.
can repeat. Maybe you can repeat the instructions. Thank you.
I'll put it in the chat here. So I'm writing, please go to the link. We have an exercise together. We have 3 boxes. So the first one in the left side, which is what finding did you consider to be the most useful or surprising from this example we saw in Tunisia? And you can just double click on one of these sticky notes and write there your feedback. What did you think was the most useful or surprising finding? And I posted there the slides in case you want to revise that, because there's a lot of information which was presented. Is anybody having any problems navigating with the platform? Okay, Dina, I can see you there.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't be participating. So
I think you can also participate. Definitely for you, what was the most useful or surprising? Okay, and also, thank you, Luis. I'm going to share my screen just in case you wish to see it. I hope this doesn't take over your screen. But yeah, that's a good way to include people. And feel free, open your mic if you wish to talk and discuss during this exercise. We're not so many people that it would create too much of a chaos.
yeah, I mean, I agree. The adoption level, how it really very clearly increased, as well as the sharing prompts. I thought that it was interesting that they worked.
Do many projects which you've been involved in, Dina, do they use mobile phones frequently, or is this something new with the CLCA project? The distribution of mobile phones.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first project where I work on distributing phones, where we have distributed phones when I was involved or leading the project, the project component. But like I said before, we really learned a lot from a previous project on digital extension. The issue of women's lack of phone ownership, as well as the feedback that we got from the team on the ground that they could not reach the women because they didn't have a phone, or they would call, like I said, the cooperative and nobody would pick up. So that was an issue. But we didn't distribute smartphones. We distributed simple phones. I think maybe you can do more with smartphones.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt, for sure. So if everybody's given their feedback to what they consider to be the most useful or surprising outcome, you can pass on to the next one, and we will repeat this exercise when we have more examples from Latin America. But within the context in which you're working with, which you have experience, have you seen yourselves any examples in which gender might have affected access to or uptake of the CLCA innovations?
Not necessarily CLCA, but not many. I can think about two studies where the information was shared with both the husband and wife, and indeed, this has increased the adoption of technologies in the household. It was just really nice to see how it really made a big difference when both were targeted. And I think we also nuanced this idea that knowledge intensive versus straightforward messaging, like, cooperatives, they work in a certain way, there's different types, as well as conservation agriculture has three components. And each component has certain knowledge and practices related to it. So the nuancing is that we found that also when it was discussed, when the information was discussed between husband and wife, these knowledge intensive practices were also more likely to be useful when targeting both the husband and the wife.
Yeah, I think that certainly tells us something about the intra-household dynamics which take place and which we should take account of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you live with someone, you discuss with them, and if you both know and are engaged in the agricultural practice, and you're more likely to discuss it. And when you discuss it, it seems to be that you're more likely to adopt it.
So here we have, regarding the second question, I think we have Santiago mentioning that in both Bolivia and Mexico, we've seen this example of when livestock production becomes more professional, it becomes taken over by men, and also perhaps the proceeds. Two different examples though. One is the production of fodder in relay cropping in Bolivia, and the production of nutrition blocks in Mexico. So different markets, but the same issue which we're seeing there. Over in Tunisia, then, there are two examples which have been shared. Small-scale machinery for on-farm feed production and forage seed processing and animal health. I don't know if anybody who's here with a microphone can go into a little bit more depth about what they intended to say with are women and men differently able to access these technologies? Does animal health impact? Is it viewed differently by women and men? Is there any more depth which you can provide in the examples here?
Yeah, and Sam, if I may add something, often in the literature related to gender and conservation agriculture, there's negative impacts on women with regards to less access to fodder, because you cannot graze your livestock, or you can, but to a certain extent. But in this project, because there was this introduction of feed and forages in the crop rotations, I think the negative implications were alleviated from conservation agriculture on women.
Yeah, I think that's a very important learning which can be applied. So Murad is jumping to another meeting. I think, as I mentioned, you can continue to do this exercise offline if you have the link. It will remain open. So please feel free to share with any colleagues of the project who may also want to record this. And we will come back to this when we can have another session on gender. But let's move on now to the third section, which is how can we help you? How can the gender specialist within the project help you to incorporate these learnings within your work? So we have one example here. And maybe Dina, you can comment on this. It would be useful to have a gender framework to integrate various biophysical interventions that would be innovative, because this does not currently exist?
Yes, I mean, the way we can help, I think, is that we have an eye, we are trained to look at and find these barriers, and also to collect success aggregated data. Often when this is done without, without really good knowledge of what is gender in rural areas, then maybe it is done with heads of households, because the surveys or the questions are asked to often the head of household, because he or she are considered to be the most knowledgeable. But when you are talking about subjective issues related to needs, opinions, then you really need to talk to both the husband and the wife. This is something that we can help with, is the collection and analysis of the sex disaggregated data, which is really the starting point to designing activities or evaluating activities. And then the second way we can help is I think through reviewing what has already been done on this subject. So we know, or actually, if you have a gender person, then it's they would know how to look for what has been done before, and learn from that, so you don't do the same mistake again, or you find something that you can replicate in your project that has worked elsewhere.
So we have two more examples which have cropped up here in Latin America. So one that is in Bolivia, ways in which gender has affected access to or uptake of conservation agriculture and livestock innovations. One is in the production of seedlings for windbreaks and grasses. There's a big opportunity for women in Bolivia, as they're in charge of and good at managing nurseries. So a little bit related to women and men's different roles in agriculture. And then in Mexico, issues of land tenure, where do women actually have access to land as a resource, and that could impact on the uptake of CLCA innovations. And so, Dina, just to go closing the session, which again I hope we can go back to. What are your future plans then in terms of the research project, the products you're creating, and which we can hopefully share among the group? And what is available there currently?
This is what's available. I will share it in the text box. We have some blogs, some policy briefs in different languages. I don't know how to share it. The arrow is not reaching. Okay. And for the future, it will be really nice to look at changes in gender norms. Like I said, which gender norms have changed and how, and then how can we measure that change? I think that will be interesting future research to follow up on.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think with that, we plan to have a shorter session, but it did mean that we could have plenty of time to listen to your presentation, which was fascinating, and get into that discussion. So we will have our next meeting on Tuesday. From here on, there will be Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I'll update the agenda for that soon. Please share the invitation with your colleagues that you don't see invited that you think would be interested. And we will come back and revisit this exercise in the context of Latin America to concentrate this learning and make sure we get that South-South mix. I will also let you know when the presentation videos, which are being translated into 3 different languages, are available on the website, which we are producing, which should be hopefully available soon to share all of these resources with you. And it sounds like the train is coming from me, so I think with that I will end the meeting and wish you all a good day. Thank you again for everybody who attended.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye bye.